Oh, all right. Apparently, we are live right now. Guys, welcome to the WMMA Scene Report, episode number 3. Hopefully, we'll get some good people in this weekend. Going to go over, as always, we're going to go over some fight news, some fight results, some fight announcements, some fight news, a couple things I'm real excited to talk about. And then tonight, we're going to have a discussion topic. And tonight's discussion topic is grading major MMA promotions that feature the women's divisions. And not all of the promotions we talk about are necessarily going to be like major in the eyes of like people that only follow like the UFC and Victor Bellator, but some of them are going to be overseas, and they are going to be ones that do feature women's mixed martial arts. The women's divisions a good amount. Now, first, I want to go over some fight results from the weekend. Don't mind if I'm looking up. I got to look at my extra monitor, which is a little higher. Bellator 207 Matrone versus Botter. We had like 3 different fights that night, or 2 or 3. And I know I already went over these over the weekend, but I just want to, do a refresher on them. In the 125 division, Alexandra Below defeated Lisa Blaine by TKO due to elbows at 3:28, round 3 of 3. Moving along, also in the 125-pound division, Sarah Click defeated Christy Lopez by unanimous decision. And then in the 145-pound division, Janae Harding defeated Sinead Kavanaugh by TKO doctor stoppage due to a cut above her, it looks like left on the thing, but over the right eyebrow. That cut, it looked like the classic pro wrestling style cut. It was caused by an elbow, but it looks like what the pro wrestlers do when they have a sharp hidden in a turnbuckle, and they'll cut themselves, and they cut it in a spot where it won't leave a scar, and it doesn't cause any real damage, but it bleeds profusely. I swear that's like the spot where that elbow landed, because that thing was bleeding and they could not get it to stop in time. So the doctor said, I've had enough. I got to stop this fight. Other than before that, it was a pretty good fight. I thought Harding was getting the better of Kavanaugh. And then Saturday, Bellator 208 had one fight, women's fight. Pretty good fight, I thought. Let me see. Jennifer Chuan, someone please correct me in how to properly say this, defeated Jessica Ruiz by TKO punches, 1 minute and 22 seconds, round 1. Jennifer Chuan, I'm just going to say Chang, obviously showed some very good boxing skills. They were saying, I think it was her they were saying, that trained out of a very good boxing gym in New York. I think they mentioned where Heather Hardy trains at. I think her hands looked a lot more slick than Hardy. Actually, I think that's a fight I'd like to see if it can be booked, is Shane versus Hardy next time Hardy comes to MMA. And then also on Saturday night, it was much later, and this one streamed on DAZN, live on DAZN, DAZN, was Combate America's, 24 already? Wow. Amanda Serrano defeated Erendira Ordonez by submission, standing rear naked choke, 4 minutes, 23 seconds of round 1. Now, I'm still going to do a review video on this fight because I think it deserves it. But man, I was very impressed by Serrano's performance in this fight. I didn't get to see her last fight because there wasn't a stream for it anywhere. But I was very impressed by this. She stalked her opponent, very smooth, very fast with her hands, just completely outclassed Ordonez in the boxing department, to where Ordonez had her back turned and Serrano was hitting her on the back, but then she saw an opportunity for a rear naked choke. She didn't even bother to jump up and put the hooks in. She had it, the standing rear naked, so tight that Ordonez had no choice but to tap out. Serrano Uh, Obviously, she's still boxing, but could be a star in the making, I believe, in mixed martial arts. I think Combate Americas was very smart to pick her up, and she has dedicated herself to cross training. She won a gold medal in a BJJ tournament, not like back in July, I think. I can't remember the exact details. Anyway, Combate Americas, good job on picking her up. I hope they find more opponents for her. I'm going to state a very controversial opinion here, or this may or may not be controversial. I think Bellator made a mistake in picking Heather Hardy over Amanda Serrano. I think Serrano was the fighter they should have gone with over Hardy. I don't think Hardy's as good a boxer as Serrano, and I think Hardy, other than known for being, tough and being able to take a punch, that's mostly what she's really known for. And then the Sparta Combat League had an event over the weekend. It was their Queen of Sparta event. Now, I didn't get to... I tried to watch it. It was hard to follow because I was also watching Bellator and PFL. Anyway, I couldn't follow the whole event. I know at least Stephanie Skinner won her first fight but dropped out. I know Celine Haga won her first bout in the boxing round but then lost in the kickboxing round. The eventual winner of the tournament, the MMA finals, was Kat Poprocki, and that was in 115 pounds, and the tournament was Kat Poprocki. So congratulations to Kat. Hope to see more from her in the future. It seemed like a pretty cool event, a pretty cool format, very different. I'm not a big fan of having both a ring and a cage next to each other. Bellator tried that with their Dynamites. I wasn't a big fan of that. I certainly wouldn't want to be in person and be closer to one or the other and not be able to see the action. I will say one thing One Championship does right is that they either go ring or cage. And they've done, their kickboxing in the cage as well. And they've done MMA in the ring. So I think if you're going to have a mix of styles, pick one or the other, ring or cage. Please don't do both. I think that takes up too much space in the arena that you could use to have people in there seated. In the meanwhile, definitely I would say stick to one or the other, please. Moving along. So there's been a couple fight announcements over the last week or so. The big one, I already did videos for both of these already, but Bellator 212 in Hawaii, it's going to simulcast on Paramount Network and DAZN. Is going to be Alejandra Lara coming in at 7-2 versus Juliana Velasquez coming in at 7-0 in the women's flyweight division. Lara last seen fighting Elimile McFarlane in a failed title bid in Elimelle's first successful title defense, and Velasquez was last seen getting a TKO over Rebecca Ruth due to a kick to the stomach, I guess, which seems pretty darn cool. I'm looking forward to this fight. It's a pretty good mix of styles. Lara can strike, but she's not shy. She's not, sloppy on the ground. She's pretty slick. And I thought she did very well against Elimile McFarlane, who is an excellent ground fighter and an EBI tournament winner. Velasquez, excellent on the ground. Excellent. I think most of her wins actually come by submission. But she's not. But obviously, if she can, TKO someone with a kick to the gut, got to give her props on her striking too, right? I mean, that's just how it is. So looking forward to this fight. And then also announced is Megan Anderson versus Kat Zingano at 145 pounds for UFC 232. Jones versus Gustafsson 2. Looks like they decided that's going to be the main event. So this is has to be, because it's on the same night as Cyborg versus Nunez. This has to be the backup fight, where if Cyborg or Nunes, God forbid, one of them drops out, one of these two is going to step up. Most likely Kat Zingano, because she's coming off a win over Marion Renault a few months back. Megan Anderson is coming off that loss to Holly Holm. Zingano's got to take this fight to the ground, and she's got to keep it there. Because Anderson's still obviously very weak on the ground. Anderson needs to keep it on the feet and stay striking and use her length and height to keep her distance. That's it for actual fight news. So we'll keep this stream kind of short tonight. I got my list. I'm old school. I still write on paper. I wanted to grade the MMA promotions that feature women's divisions. I tried to keep it to major ones or ones that had at least 2 different women's divisions. And so I decided to grade them on different criteria. So I don't have a total grade for each of these or an average grade. I wanted to keep this, we'll separate them by these criteria. And the criteria is number of divisions they feature. So if you have more divisions, you're going to get a better grade. Frequency of events that feature women. Obviously, the more events that have women, the higher the grade you get. The average activity of fighters in said promotion. So if you have some fighters that are very active, but then you have a bunch of fighters that are inactive, you're going to get a more average grade. And then the last one is perceived favoritism. Now, this one, if you get a higher grade, you're not perceived as favoring your fighters too much. Whereas if you get a low grade, it means you obviously are putting all your money or all your promotion into a select few fighters and mostly ignoring the others or just using them as feeders for your favorite fighters. Hold on a second, guys. Okay. So we're going to start off with number of divisions. And we're going to go down through the promotions like that. So number of divisions. UFC, I gave an A-. Now, the only reason they didn't get a regular A is because of a lack of atomweight fighters. Excuse me, a lack of the atomweight division. They have every major division but atomweight. And honestly, and another contributor, I might even have to move them down to a B+ because their featherweight division is an absolute joke right now. I know I just announced a featherweight fight for them, but it's also featuring a career bantamweight who actually started her career out at flyweight. So I might have to give them a B+ because they don't have an atomweight division, which is huge for me. I'm a big fan of that division. And their featherweight division is crap. Invicta, A+. They have atomweight up through featherweight, and they've even had a couple of lightweight fights, 1 or 2. Lightweight, obviously, not really an established division in the sport, but because they have the 5 major important ones, they get an A+. Bellator gets a solid C. They have 2 solid divisions in featherweight and flyweight, and then they've had a few strawweight fights recently, mostly thanks to Kerry Melendez. So for that, they get a C. If they added more, or if they tried to add more, they could go up to a C+, B-. One championship also gets a C because they have their, I'm not even going to call them what one prefers to call them. They have strawweight and they have flyweight, 115 and 125. So same as Bellator, they only have 2 divisions. They get a C. Road FC, the Korean promotion, I give a B-. And the main reason I have them on here is because they've had 2 actual whole shows where the main card was dedicated to all women fighters. I give them a B-. They have an atomweight division. They've had plenty of strawweight fights. They actually have an atomweight title. And then they've had fights across several divisions. They've had flyweight fights. They've had bantamweight fights. And then they've even had some lightweight and openweight fights. So even though they don't have the established divisions for those, they definitely put forth an effort into featuring the women across the different weights and not just put all their money into one or two divisions. I forgot to mention King of the Cage. King of the Cage also gets a C. They have atom weights and they have straw weights, but that's basically it for them. And then finally, Deep Jewels. Deep Jewels is an all-women's promotion run. They were independent. Now they're owned by the Deep Promotion. They're in Japan. I give them an A+ because they have multiple promotions. I don't know how many they have exactly, but excuse me. Almost every show they have, the women are well represented across the different weight divisions. They might not have a 145, or they might have had in the past. It's hard for them to get the bigger fighters over in Japan, whereas they mostly focus on the smaller ones. So instead of an A+, I'm going to give them just an A. Now, I'm going to rethink that. I'm going to give them, I'm going to write that down. They just get an A. So then moving on to frequency of events that feature the women's divisions, that feature women fighters. UFC, I got to give an A, because they have really upped the number of women's fights that they show. They try to have women fights on every card. They do their best to do that. It's obvious they want to, because they have so many events, they have to fill up their events with as many fights as possible. So obviously they're trying to put women. Sometimes they're just in the Fight Pass prelims, but a lot of times they like to shoehorn them in to the televised prelims or the main card. A lot of times they even have women fights on the pay-per-view. So UFC gets a solid A for frequency of events. Invicta, A+, because they're all women promotion. Every event they put on is going to feature nothing but women. So obviously they get an A+. Bellator, B. Bellator has increased the number of events that they have, I believe, from when Scott Coker first took over. They used to have them on almost every week, and then they take a month or two off. But back in the Bjorn era, they didn't really have. They had one women's tournament and a few women's fights after that. So they get a B. King of the Cage gets a B-. I can't keep track of all of their events because they put on more events than probably any other single promotion, because the main promoter for them, Terry Treblecock, also sells the rights to the rents the rights to the King of the Cage name to, local promoters. But they definitely advertise a lot for the women fighters, and almost every fighter that features women has at least one of the women on their event poster. One Championship, they get a B. They tend to feature at least one women's fight on most of their events. So for that, I'll give them a solid B. Road FC, I have to give a B-. Now, last year they were doing really well. They had women on almost every event, or most of the events. They had 2 all-women's events. This year, due to some internal stuff that was going on, their CEO decided to retire. He's still the owner. They had a new CEO take over, and they went from like 12 events last year to only 6 scheduled events this year. And the number of women's events, number of women fights have really dropped off this year. They do have one scheduled coming up for, I believe it's November 13th, I want to say. I'll get back to you on that date. But they do have a women's fight coming up on their next event. Jules gets an A. The only reason they don't get an A+, being an all-women's promotion, you'd think they'd get an A+, but they just don't put on the frequency of events that Invicta does. Jules is more like once every 3 months, every 4 months, whereas Invicta's pretty much every other month. Next category is the average activity of fighters in their promotion. So how often do the women get to fight for them? UFC gets a B- to a C+. Now, some fighters are very active in the UFC, and this goes for their men too. But we only talk about the women on this channel. B minus to a C plus, because some fighters get to fight seemingly as much as they want, or if they're a favorite fighter, they can fight as often as they want. But some fighters will just be sitting around forever, and there's memes on them, like, waiting around for someone to get a fight, like, and that skeleton go, oh, yeah. So I've seen that for a few women fighters. I know my buddy Drake put that up for Randa. That was like a couple years ago. He did that for Randa Marcus. Whoo, that's strong. Invicta gets a B because, they put on less events. Sometimes you'll see a fighter frequently. Sometimes you'll see a fighter once and then you don't see him again for a while, or they have to take fights somewhere else. And that's because, they just don't put on events all the time. Sometimes it's for a little bit of perceived favoritism, which we'll get into later. King of the Cage, I'm going to give Bellator, B minus. They don't put on women on all their cards. I think if you're going to have two solid divisions, which they do, they should be able to get at least one fight on each card. Even if they have to spread them out so that there's not as many fights on each card, not as many women's fights on each card, spread them out so that there's a women's fight on every card, maybe. But then again, I do like watching 2 or 3 fights on one single card, especially now that all their prelims are going to be streaming now. King of the Cage gets a B. The fighters that are signed to them that I do follow, they seem to fight fairly often. Unfortunately, a lot of times it's a bunch of rematches, which ain't so great, but they do get to fight fairly often. One championship, I got to give a solid C. Some fighters, it seems like they'll fight for a little bit and then you don't hear from them forever. Some fighters, you rarely ever hear from them. Others, whereas if you're a favorite fighter again, you get to fight as much as you want. But even sometimes their favorite fighters don't fight very often because they like to keep certain fighters fighting in certain countries because, they are all over Southeast Asia. They hold events all over, and most of their fighters are from Southeast Asia. So they try to keep their fighters only fighting in events in their home country, which often prevents these fighters from fighting as often as they could or should fight. Road FC, because of their recent downturn, and I don't want to call it a downturn necessarily, they're reorganizing stuff. I'm a big fan of Road FC. I'm very connected to Korea. I spent a significant amount of time over there when I was in the service, and I've always followed the Korean scene. So with that said, I have to give them a C plus because they've had hardly any WMMA women's fights this past year. But one thing I will say about Road FC, if their fighters want to go fight overseas for a fight or two, they give them that opportunity. John Eun Park has fought since last December. She's fought 1, 2, 3 total times in Deep Jewels. They've allowed her to fight there. They've allowed Yuri Shim to fight overseas. Sohee Lim, they let go fight in shoot boxing twice. They let her, one of the times was for the Ladies S Cup tournament. So Road FC does let overseas, get some experience, and come back and show off what they've learned. I still got to give them a C plus. Otherwise, I'd give them a C or even a C minus, which hurts because I love that promotion. They put on great shows. Deep Jewels, I give them a B plus, and that's because they just don't have that many events. They're like a quarterly show, if that. And again, they have some of their favorites that fight very often. Sometimes they don't. I think I need to lay off the whiskey there because I can't stop burping. And the last category, perceived favoritism. UFC, I give a B. Now, if this were still the Ronda Rousey era, they'd be C, D. But once Rousey was gone, they stopped showing favoritism to certain fighters as much as they used to. They still do sometimes. Like, I think it's obvious that they want Valentina Shevchenko as the flyweight champ. I don't know why. Well, I mean, she's good. That's why. Joanna got an immediate rematch after getting, TKO'd in the first round. So there's a little bit of favoritism there. Michelle Watterson keeps staying in the high end of rankings, even though she only has one good win recently against Felice Herrig. So they get a B. Hopefully they can improve, drop the favoritism a little bit, and get back up to an A. Invicta, this hurts, the leading light of women's MMA. I have to give them a B. And it used to be worse because under a certain former matchmaker who I won't name because I still want to, I went to their event and I want to go to another one. So I don't want to ruffle too many feathers or burn bridges. But they used to favor certain fighters a lot. Megan Anderson was obviously a favored fighter for them. Maybe it's because of fan frenzy. Maybe, I don't know. Tony Evinger was a favored fighter. Watterson was a favored fighter for them. Livia Souza was definitely a favored fighter. And it's not just the matchmakers either. There was a certain co-owner who, again, I won't name because we won't even get into why she's not around anymore. But they definitely used to favor fighters more often than they do now, and they've improved a lot. So they get a solid B. Bellator, I give a C because why is it that their only strawweight fights anymore are for Kerry Melendez? Why is that the prettier fighters in the flyweight division get more fights than the not so pretty fighters? Why? Yeah, that's it for Bellator. So they get a C just because there's obvious favoritism, I think, but it's not that bad. King of the Cage gets a B minus. They're much like Bellator, the prettier fighters get more fights. And I understand it because they're more popular. They have more social media followers. They probably sell more tickets. But still, they get a B minus for that. One championship. They get the only failing grade of this entire segment. For perceived favoritism, they get a D. And I will string it all. I could string it all to one name, and that is Angela Unstoppable Lee. Obviously, she is more favored than any of their female fighters. They give her easy matchups a lot of times. They give her fighters who belong. She's a strawweight, okay? They call it atom weight. She is a strawweight, but they often match her up against actual true atom weights. See Mei Yamaguchi, see Jenny Huang, see several of her earlier fights for the promotion. So they obviously favor Angela Lee. And then for who was the first who was in the first flyweight title once they finally introduced it? Or excuse me, strawweight for one championship. 125 flyweight. Xingnan Zhang, who definitely should belong in there because she was one of the top 125ers outside of the UFC and outside of Invicta at the time. So not bad. But who did she fight against in that first match? Tiffany Teo, who's from Singapore, which is the home country of one championship. It's where they're headquartered. So they wanted a true native Singaporean champ. Now, Tiffany Teo, she was on a win streak, so you could use that to justify her being there. But we all know that was definitely in one championship's mind when they booked that fight, that she's a native Singaporean fighter. So we have a chance to get a second fighter that we say reps Singapore. They always say Angela Lee reps Singapore because her dad's from there, but she doesn't live there. She was born in Canada. She lives in Hawaii. But they always call her the hometown girl. Same for her brother. So one championship anyway gets a D, the only failing grade. I want to like one championship. I like them. I want to love them. But they need to fix a lot of stuff to get really better, especially in the women's divisions. Now, Road FC perceived favoritism. I got to give them a B. Why did I give them a B? I don't know. I'm going to have to really rethink on that grade. Because if anything, they don't favor their hometown fighters at all. Because they'll bring in like tough fighters from Japan to face their hometown Korean fighters. And a lot of times their homegrown Korean female fighters have 500 records. Some of them are worse. Some of them are struggling to get above that 500 record. So you know what? I'm actually going to give Road FC an A+ for that because they don't favor their hometown fighters at all. Okay? And here's another example. For their atomweight championship initial fight, it was Sahi Ham. So obviously, you know, the hometown girl. But who did she fight? She fought the Japanese Deep Jules atomweight champ. So they did not just give her an easy fight for that title. They gave her another champion from Japan. And then her first defense, who did they give her? Couple websites were listing Ham as number 1 in the division at the time. They brought in the person that those same sites were listing as the number 2 in the division at the time, Jin Yu-Fry. So not on paper, should have been a very tough fight for Ham. And I'll tell you what, that fight is still fresh in my mind. Every time I watch that fight, I've watched it maybe 10 times. Every time I watch it, I get goosebumps because of all the tension that was in that fight. They didn't give Ham an easy fight, okay? Jin made a mistake. Ham capitalized. So they're not giving their fighters any perceived favoritism. So for them, I'll give Road FC an A+, the only A+ in that section. And then Deep Jules gets a lower grade, a C, because they do bring in their more popular fighters more often. And I'll tell you what, the way Jules does it, and it's the same way with a lot of Japanese mixed martial arts promotions. The newbies, the novices are always going to be fodder for veterans in Deep Jules. That's why you see fighters that have 12 fights or more fighting fighters that only have 3-4 fights at the most. And, you know, I kind of understand why you might want to do that because it does give the newer fighters, it lets them know what level they're at. Like if they win, good. They can keep fighting higher level fighters. And if they lose, then it gives them a chance to get that good experience against the veterans. But at the same time, it's like you're giving your novice fight. It's the reason why so many of the Japanese female fighters have these like 500 records. You know, some of the fighters have been fighting for them forever. Like the actual veterans, like Emi Tomomatsu, has a 500 record. So for that, they get a C. So that's the end of my grading seminar. One last thing I want to talk about before we end. And I made an independent video about this, but I want to talk about it some more. Is Carla Esparza decided to start a campaign for the UFC to get atom weights. And I'm going to bring the post up in a second here, and I'm going to read straight from it. It's a picture of the belt, the UFC belt, photoshopped onto a scale. It has 105 pounds on it. It says, "It's time" in big, bold red letters. And then it says in smaller black letters, #UFC atomweight. And the caption reads, women's MMA has come so far these last few years. Since November 2012, the UFC has welcomed 4 female divisions. To make this complete, I think the 105-pound atomweight division needs to be brought in. There are so many exciting matchups to be made in this stacked division, with myself included. If you agree and want to see the UFC welcome the atomweights, please share this post and tag @UFC, @Dana White, @McMaynard, @Sean Shelby, #, # whatever you want to call it, UFC atom weight. So guys, I did it in the independent video. I'm doing it now. If you are a fan of women's mixed martial arts, if you are a fan of the atom weights, if you are a fighter yourself, if you are friends of a fighter, if you train with some of these atom weight pros, anytime you see one of these, atom weights or even smaller straw weight fighters posting on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I don't know if hashtags work so much on Facebook, but hit up the tag UFC atom weight and then tag UFC, Dana White, Mick Maynard, and Sean Shelby. Let's get this promotion. Let's get this campaign going and off the ground. I think it's very important. I think the biggest problem with the atomweight division is that it is spread out across so many different promotions. I think every 4 out of the 4 out of the 7 promotions that I named have an established atomweight division, and one other one, 1FC, actually has a bunch of actual atomweight fighters. So if you could bring them all into the UFC, or at least start and get that umbrella going, get that roof over their head, you would see that this division really does have depth. Now, you might have a few straw weights come down. Obviously, Carla. There's a few smaller ones. Tisha Torres, maybe. I don't know if she can make the weight. Who else? Michelle Watterson. I think if the UFC brought in the atom weights, she would dedicate herself to getting her weight back down so that she can make it safely. Towards the end of her Invicta career, I know her last defense against, what was the short little Brazilian girl? Anyway, she had trouble making the weight on short notice. But I believe Michelle has said that if UFC were to bring in the atomweight division, that she'd go back down. And I think it'd be worth it for her. So that's maybe 3, but that's honestly all I see coming down from the current UFC strawweight division. So there's definitely, the talent is definitely out there, okay? And if you don't believe me, I have a 4-part video series on this where I talk about why the UFC needs the atomweight division. Please go check it out in my channel. So guys, go out there and let's get this campaign started and going. If not, fine, but I'm certainly going to help with it. So, guys, that's all I have for tonight. Next week, we're going to be live on Tuesday. I tried to do it yesterday, and unfortunately, I was so tired at the end of the day. I didn't have my nap earlier, so I ended up falling asleep. I'm sorry about that, but from now on, the WMMA scene report will be on Tuesday. And I'll tell you why. I don't want to do it on Monday, and I don't want to do it on Wednesday, because those are the 2 days that my personal favorite streaming show, the WMMA host, is on, and I don't want to interfere with them because I think they're still going right now, which probably explains my lack of audience tonight. So hopefully some other people will watch this later, and hopefully we'll get some more people on a different day. So guys, have a good night, and if you haven't yet, subscribe to WMMA now, the best, the fastest growing women's mixed martial arts platform on YouTube. Guys, have a good night.